Hello and welcome back. So today we'll be going over the deep league value plays that aren't rookies. So if you watched my rookies video over the weekend, that may have helped you a little bit, but for deep 14, 16, 18, even 20 team leagues, if that isn't enough for you, then you need more, and I've got some guys to check out today. So we'll be taking a look at more veteran options in this video. Now, quickly before we dive in, some of these guys are falling in drafts, but they have elite production in one or two categories that you may want to target late in your draft if you somehow forgot to add a shots guy or a hits guy or whatever. So, a couple times you might go through your mocks, or you might end up with your actual draft, and you get towards those late rounds and you're starting to think to yourself, gee, I don't have anybody for hits or shots or whatever. Some of these guys are elite level in those categories, and this is where you could potentially find some value. In this range, you're not going to find guys who are good at everything. You're not going to find category coverage run amok in this range. So, and these guys are either going really late in a 12-team draft or are passing through a 12-team draft undrafted, so they could be targets for deeper leagues. And if you saw the thumbnail, the first guy we're going to start with is somebody who may have burned you in the past. And last year, he probably stood out in front of your window blasting Peter Gabriel, asking, "Are you ready to hurt again?" Then he went out and teased us all with a little bit of classic Jeff Skinner. So last year, 33 goals, a .78 point per game, 3.27 shots per game, ranked him 29th in the league in shots. So he's still a shot volume monster. After several down years in Buffalo last year, he kind of picked it right back up. Now, he has hit 40 goals before in 18-19, and that was the season where he tied his career high, which he's actually hit multiple times, with 63 points. And as you'll notice here, he hit that on the nose again last year. So you may be asking yourself at this point, how confident am I that he'll bounce back and come up with another career year on top of this career year? I'm not very confident, to be honest with you, but at 174 ADP, sliding through most 12-team drafts, there's almost no risk and a ton of shot volume reward as well as goal production in his file. So on top of that, he did find some nice chemistry last year with Tage Thompson, and he seems to like playing for Coach Don Granato. And everything there is still in place from last season. So maybe he can back up what he did last year this season. Again, sometimes what I talk about with additional risk with players is when they move to a new team and they have to reorganize and change things. Well, he hasn't moved to a new team. Everything's in place. His centerman is in place. He just got a massive contract. That was Tage Thompson signing in the offseason. So Jeff Skinner, if you need shot volume late in the draft, he was 29th overall, and you can get him in the 15th round. So that could be a nice value play for you there. One guy I've had my eye on towards the tail end of last year and definitely heading into this season is Erik Karlsson. So the case for Karlsson is pretty straightforward. He's being drafted in the 12th round as essentially a D4 or a D5, and he will be a power play quarterback in San Jose. So if you think Karlsson is over the hill, do so at your own risk. Karlsson is only 32 years old, definitely not over the hill in terms of age. Obviously, the injury history would scare you away, and that's why he's this low in terms of ADP. But people are avoiding Karlsson like the plague, and there was some production from him last year. So he scored 10 goals, 35 points in 50 games, averaging .7 points per game, which is the exact same as his 5-year average. So it was right about where he's supposed to be. And on top of that, I'm not saying Karlsson is going to be what he once was. We're not at all saying that, but he can surely be a quality D3 power play quarterback for you if that's what you need. And if you recall back to that analysis I did for the elite defenseman video, the metric that I was looking at was defensemen who were over .5 points per game, top 10th percentile in both shots and power play production. And in that analysis, Karlsson was there twice in 18-19 and 17-18. So this season was the year with Ottawa, and he was on this list. He was number 3 in terms of elite offensive defensemen for all 3 metrics. Then the next year he got traded to San Jose, and he increased his shot volume and then kept up the rest of his stats, and he was again the 3rd best defenseman in the league. So there is, a little bit of history in his file in terms of being an elite guy for not only power play production but also shots and overall, what you would want in an elite defenseman. So the other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention His shot volume was slightly higher in those years, so he was at a 3.18 and a 2.76, but he was trending up from 2021 to last year, finishing with a 2.34 shots per game average. And the power play numbers weren't there, but now Brent Burns is gone. So he is the power play guy. He's the alpha dog on the blue line, and he is relatively healthy heading into the season. And then if you look at his goal per game, the goal per game leaders on defense from last season, you see there's 2 or 3 really interesting names, and we went over this in the defenseman video. Adam Boquist is a nice deep play if you need goal production from defense and you're deep in your draft. He's not necessarily a rookie. He's not necessarily a veteran, so I didn't necessarily cover him in this video, but small sample size, he had 11 goals last year. Justin Falk, another guy, 16 goals last year, getting some power play time in St. Louis. But there's Erik Karlsson, 0.2 goals per game. That would translate to a 16-goal pace over an 82-game season, which is exactly what Justin Falk ended up with. So if you're looking for goal production, maybe some shot production, and an elite power play quarterback, obviously not quite as elite as he used to be, I get that. But Devon Taves is going to put up better numbers, that's for sure. But to get the same level of goal production and a guy who quarterbacks the power play may be what you're looking for. And if that is what you're looking for, you could do a lot worse than Erik Karlsson. Now, staying on the same theme here, speaking of the San Jose power play, I'd list Logan Couture on this list, but he's going 168 in the 14th round, which is, he will be picked up in a 12-team draft sometimes, but he has fallen through a number of mine. So last year, the San Jose power play was 22nd in the league at 18.9%, which isn't really noteworthy, but Karlsson will be the power play quarterback, and that might increase their production just a little bit. And if you just look, pretty much nobody on San Jose is fantasy ownable except for the guys on the power play, and that would be Couture, Hertl, Meyer, Karlsson, and Kevin Labanc. Now, in a deep league, you could find some value in Kevin Labanc. The stats aren't there. I was going to highlight him in this video, but there just wasn't enough there for me to recommend that you go out and get him. But if you're in a really deep league and you want some PP1 exposure, Kevin Labanc could be your guy. But if you're targeting a guy like Couture, you're getting 0.72 point per game, 2.5 shots, a couple of hits in there, which was a little surprising. And then if you look at his 5-year average, 0.339 goal per game, 27 goal pace, and his high is a 35 goal pace. So he's been there before. He's the guy now. He's the captain. He's the number 1 center. And this is a theme that you're going to notice in a couple of these guys, is that if you can't get, when you're this deep in the draft, you're not going to get some of the better players that you're probably going to want to target. So why not pick off one of the top 6 or especially top line guys on a bad team? And I don't think San Jose is going to be as bad as Arizona. I don't think they're going to be as bad as Chicago, but guys just aren't running to draft San Jose Sharks this year. You could potentially find some value in these 2 files, Karlsson and Couture, depending on how you feel about them. But what you will get out of them is first line power play exposure, and that could be a nice thing to add this deep in the draft. So sticking with the theme of good players on bad teams, which is definitely a theme you can exploit for value. And this is mainly if your league doesn't have plus minus, because obviously you're not going to want to go there if it does. But this is a nice file, Clayton Keller. So 67 games, 63 points, 0.94 point per game. And if you look at his goal per game, 0.41, that's a 33 goal pace. Keller's 5-year average is around 0.71 points per game. But that was a lot of his younger seasons where he was establishing himself. He had that good rookie year and then regressed for a few seasons after that. And then the Coyotes were just not competitive, and they still aren't. So a lot of that is baked into his file. But now Keller is entering into that prime age range at 24 years old. And last year seemed less like a case of potential regression because he did overperform his average. But it seemed more like a player finally reaching the potential that he was drafted at. So as I just mentioned, the 0.94 point per game, 0.41 goal per game average. He's dual eligible left wing, right wing, and he's being drafted in the 12th round because nobody wants to own Coyotes. At that range, I'll take a flyer on Keller. And in fact, if you watch the Data Draft Community League draft on Sunday, I live streamed that. I did just that, and I got him in the 16th round at 160 with my second to last pick. So That's what I'm talking about. Deep, deep value. He was a guy with a .94 point per game average and a 33 goal pace, and I got him with the second to last pick. And he will get top power play time. He will be on the top line there. There's basically nobody else in Arizona, and they're not going to be a good team. But even if they suck, somebody has to put the puck in the net 2 or 3 times a game. And I would look at Keller as the guy who's going to drive most of that offense. Now, if you need a deeper play than Clayton Keller, go out and grab his line mate, Nick Schmaltz, who's a center. I don't have his ADP because I could not find it. He was that low in terms of ADP, but .93 point per game average, right there with Clayton Keller. The positional flexibility isn't as good, but the production is. And I mentioned him in the potential regression candidates video, and I do think he should regress from that. I don't think Keller will, but I do think Schmaltz will. But he could be a really, really deep option if you're looking to mine some value out of these bad teams. And then sticking with the same theme, it seems like everybody forgot. Do we all remember when Jakob Chychrun was a borderline 4th or 5th round pick just last year? So let's take a stroll down memory lane and imagine the year is 2021. The stands are empty, not just in Arizona, but all over the league. And Jakob Chychrun was an 18-goal defenseman averaging over 3 shots per game with all of his category coverage, and it seemed like he was entering into a new tier in terms of his potential. So here we stand a year later. Chychrun is strolling around ASU's campus looking for his new locker room, and after just underperforming that season by almost .3 points per game and dealing with some more injuries over the offseason and late last year, nobody wants to even think about him. He's slipped through multiple drafts that I've done over the last week, and in our data draft league, Mark, the Mighty Duckman, Emilio, grabbed him at 166 in the 17th round with his absolute last pick. So if you want to take a late flyer on a defenseman who is also likely to be traded this year, and that's a key, he's been asking for a trade. They're going to accommodate him. They have multiple suitors. They're just waiting for the right deal. So yeah, you could get a guy who's going to get you shot volume and goal scoring, and you're going to get him at ADP 150 in the 13th round, or even later than that potentially. And then, like I was just mentioning, for guys like Patrick Kane and Jakob Chychrun who are falling in drafts, because they're on bad teams, he will likely be traded, at the absolute latest at the deadline. He's more than likely going to get traded before that because they're tanking. They're trying not to win games, so they don't want him on the team, because if he's on the team, they might win some games. So there is a little bit of risk involved because of his injury history and obviously the Coyotes factor, but going at the absolute tail end of most 12-team drafts is too late for this guy, in my opinion. If you forgot about him, here's your reminder. Now, as for guys everyone seems to be forgetting about, let's talk about Mikael Granlund. So ADP 168 in the 14th round, which makes absolutely no sense with him on PP1 in Nashville. That power play ranked 6th in the league last year at 24.4%, and he's on it. So nothing has changed. He's still the guy on the power play, one of the 5 on that unit, obviously. And last year he ranked 38th in the league for power play points per game. And some similar names in that range: Mitch Marner, Mika Zibanejad, Brian Rust, Josh Norris, Kuznetsov, DeBrincat, on and on and on. All of those guys were below Granlund in terms of power play points per game. So if you want that power play guy, you don't have to necessarily spring early in the draft to get him. You could potentially wait. Now, you're going to get less category coverage. So 1.4 shots per game is very low, but he does get 1.15 hits per game, and the goal per game was low at 0.13. But if you look at his 5-year goal per game average at 0.227, that's an 18-goal pace. It's a little bit more ownable. Still not great. But he will have more to work with this year with Nino Niederreiter coming over from Carolina to help their offensive depth. So that could potentially boost Granlund. And if you're thinking about Niederreiter, he's at ADP 169.9 in the 14th round. So those two guys could be somebody that you look at later in your draft. I would steer towards Granlund because of his power play 1 exposure. Now, again, you're not getting the goal production. You're getting a ton of assists, though, in terms of where you're getting him in the draft. 53 assists in 80 games last year is pretty good for a guy this late in the draft. And then the power play points, that's where he racked up a lot of those assists, and he will continue to be on that unit as far as I know. I haven't watched any of their preseason games yet, but I would assume he's still going to be there. Now, The next guy on this list, I mentioned in a different context. I actually mentioned it last night watching Fantasy Puck in his live draft in their chat. Phill Kessel is maybe the most ridiculous file in this video. So apparently he's a 15th round pick. Guys like Owen Power and Slafkovsky are being picked ahead of him. And for anything other than a keeper league, that's just insane. Another thing, Mason Marchment is ADP 172, which is a little bit ahead of Kessel, which again makes no sense to me. Here's the case for Phill Kessel. So 0.63 point per game last year. His 5-year average is 0.81. So he's statistically due for a bump in production. But then on top of that, he moves to an obviously more competitive team. And right now in training camp, he's currently on a line with Jack Eichel. So if he keeps that line assignment and stays in the top 6, I'd run to the waiver wire and pick him up. They've already connected for a number of goals in preseason. Obviously, that doesn't count for anything, but if he gets that line assignment, I could see Jack Eichel being a 40-goal scorer. I could see Kessel not only increasing his point production, but potentially starting to shoot again. So he's been on an irrelevant team for a few years now, and his production has suffered as a result. But if you see with the 2021 stats, not bad at all, despite the Coyotes sucking. So if we look at the last time he played with a team of this caliber, granted, he was 3 years younger, it was Pittsburgh, but his power play points per game numbers, again, that was a stacked unit, but the power play points per game numbers, 0.51 and 0.43 for 42 and 36 power play points respectively, including 10 game winners, 12 power play goals, 3.1 shots per game, and then 2.6 shots per game, and then a 1.12 and a 1 point per game average in those seasons in Pittsburgh. So if he happens to see some power play time in Vegas and he's on the top line with Jack Eichel, he won't be on the waiver wire for long. So take this as your forewarning to jump on him. And if it doesn't work out, he's obviously droppable, seeing as how he's at ADP 179 in the 15th round. So this is a guy with tons of pedigree. You all know that he was a 40-goal scorer. You know that he was a shot volume guy. On top of that, if you look at the goal per game, this was the last decent year. He was at a 29-goal pace with almost nothing to work with in Arizona. And when he had things to work with, he was over a 30-goal guy and well over a point per game in 17-18. That was a while ago. I get that. He's a little bit older. You can see some gray in that beard. But he's in phenomenal shape, supposedly, heading into training camp. And with that Jack Eichel exposure, I would definitely take a shot on him in a deep, deep league. Now, this is a line. It's not just one guy. It's 3 guys that are being, faded in a lot of leagues. So the only guy currently ranked within the top 16 rounds for Yahoo's ADP is Arvidsson at 183.2 in the 16th round. Kind of nuts. Danault and Trevor Moore are even deeper. So if you look at Arvidsson, the 3.43 shots per game, that, if I can pull it up, that was 21st in the league last year. So if you need a shots guy late, he's at 183 ADP, and he's 21st in the league in shots. And then on top of that, 20 goals, 29 assists, 49 points, 0.74 point per game. He was the highest of the group. If your league has face-off wins, Danault would be one guy that you want to look at because of this line and because of his overall production. So 27 goals, nothing, that's really decent for Danault, who was seen as more of a shutdown defensive type defenseman. 0.64 points per game. The shot numbers are fine. 2.4 is ownable for sure. And then if you look at his line mate, Trevor Moore, 81 games played, 17 goals, so a little bit lower in the production, 0.59 point per game, but the shot numbers are there as well. Now, the production is on the screen, so you can see why Arvidsson is seen more favorably, but the whole line is fantastic, and let me show you the proof. So this is the line combinations and goals for. So if you, on the right here is goals for. These are some of the lines that they are better than and in the same category as. I mean, just look at the Ovechkin, Kuznetsov, Wilson line, Pasternak's here, the Tkachuk, Norris, Batherson line. People are targeting them in fantasy this year. They were better, or marginally better, but still they were in that same range. Arvidsson, Danault, and Moore, and the line ranked 10th in the league in goals for with 28 goals on a team that ranked 20th in goals. So they were starved for offense, so much so that they went out and traded for Kevin Fiala. But they were very productive when they're on the ice, and they will likely be together again. So if you're looking for deep value, it starts with Arvidsson. He's at, the most, highest ADP, I guess, technically speaking, at 183. Danault's not listed on what I was looking at, and Trevor Moore is probably a waiver guy in most of your leagues. So this line, if you want access to it, you could potentially find it deep, and that could definitely help you out. Now, we were talking about shot volume before. I forgot to put his ADP up here. Actually, I couldn't find it. That's why it was not up here. But speaking of shot volume, can I interest anybody in a bounce back Brendan Gallagher? So he's not listed in the 16 rounds of ADPs currently available on Yahoo. He did have a horrible year last year, but every other year he's been really solid, most specifically in shot volume, a little bit goals, and then a little bit of hits as well. So if you look here, his 5-year point per game is 0.62. That's borderline ownable. 0.42 last year is not. 5-year shot per game, 3.29 shots per game. That would put him in the top 30 or so in the league last year. If he was putting that up last year, he would have been in the top 30. Last year, he was at 2.53, so definitely low there. 5-year hits per game, 1.16. That's maybe targetable. It's at least ownable. And he was not that far off from it last year, despite missing some time with injury. So last year was a terrible year. If you exclude last year, if you look at his goal per game, 4-year average, it's a 31 goal pace. So he scored 7 goals in 56 last year, so it wasn't working for him last year. But that offense is a lot better than what they've been putting out there lately. So you add Slavkovsky, Caulfield's another year older. They bring in Dadonov. The defense still leaves a little bit to be desired, but they're building. Caden Gooley might get an opportunity this year. There's some other guys that are battling back from injury. Joel Edmondson, David Savard might be there this year. Jake Allen got the contract extension, so they've got the goaltending, a little bit more solidified. And I wouldn't necessarily run to try to draft Jake Allen with that defense, but in terms of the offense, the guys that you're targeting from their offense, Gallagher could be a guy, especially if you need shot volume later in your draft and you don't have it, because he's a guy who typically gets that shot volume and some goal coverage as well. So that's what you're looking at. I mentioned you want to look for 1 or 2 categories. Those are his categories, and nobody's drafting him this year. Now, there's a bunch of guys that I was looking at for this video, and I could have, each of these guys could have got potentially a file, but we'll just go through them quickly. Just to give you a little bit of a sense of what you can look at. So for Cam Atkinson, the goal production there, historically he's been a 40 goal scorer, so that's what you look for. But then you look at the shots numbers, so 2.945 shots per game. That's really good. That's probably putting him in the top 50 or so, really close to that. And then that was a down year last year anyway. They had a lot of problems in Philadelphia. They're going to be healthier this year. Speaking of which, Kevin Hayes is on this list as well. If you remember, his dad had just died right before the season last year, and then right after that, he immediately got injured. So horrible year for Kevin Hayes. Hopefully things are better. He's a good guy. Used to be a Ranger, so I know him from that. I've seen him on Spit and Chicklets a bunch of times, and you definitely want to root for a guy like that and hope that he can bounce back. But he will be their top-line center, and he will be on the first power play unit because Couturier he's not going to play, at least for the foreseeable future. So that you're definitely getting some first line and first power play exposure with Kevin Hayes and probably with Cam Atkinson as well. With Dadonov, nothing crazy, but he can score goals. So 0.35 goal per game range most years. But the last year, near a 30 goal pace over an 82 game season. A little bit down last year in Vegas. The last couple of years haven't been great, which is why he was potentially getting traded out of Vegas. But if you remember, he almost saved their season last year, scoring a couple big goals, getting a hat trick down the stretch, trying to help them get into the playoffs after they tried to trade him and it didn't work. So now that he's in a better situation, playing with a player's coach in Marty St. Louis, that could potentially bump his production just a little bit. The shot numbers are ownable. Points numbers are not great, but again, deep value. You could be looking at him. You could be looking at Hoffman too. For potential bounce back, but he did play for St. Louis last year, and it didn't look like he took a huge bump. Now, Nico Hischier, I've been waiting on him for a while. He's still productive at 0.85 points per game last year, so pretty decent there. The assist coverage is really decent there as well, 0.55. And then he's getting drafted after guys like Chychrun, Beniers, Krebs, Lundell, which it makes sense for keeper leagues. It doesn't make sense for a redraft league. So he's battling a little bit of injury. That's his main problem over the last number of years, but he does a little bit on the power play, 0.17, 12 power play points last year. So you're getting a little bit of production there. And the Devils are more competitive this year, so he has a little bit more to work with. Now, I mentioned him in a different video, Brock Nelson, Brocktober. So I found an analysis done 4 years ago on the Brocktober phenomenon. And why did I use it? Well, there hasn't been a lot of hockey in October over the last 3 years. Things have been kind of different up in the air. But in that analysis, it shows Nelson averaging 0.75 points per game in October and around 0.4 every other month. In addition to that, he just had a career goal-scoring season with 37 goals last year. It was a 40-goal pace over an 82-game season, which is what you're looking at here highlighted. If he played 10 more games and continued this pace, he would have hit 40. So to find that deep in the draft, he is, I believe, being drafted in a 12-team draft, but you can find him pretty deep, and he does not have any name value. Nobody wants him. So that could be a guy to mine some value. And then Victor Olofsson, if you look at this file, there's nothing great about it. The point totals are not bad. 0.68 is ownable. The shot numbers are okay. The power play production is okay. But what you want to look at is his power play goal coverage. So the last 2 seasons, he's had 7 power play goals, and then 3 years ago, he had 11. So if you're in a points league with waiting for power play goals and you need somebody really deep, he will likely be on the PP1, and he will probably be the trigger guy on the opposite of the Ovechkin spot. So he's a left shot, so he'd be directly across the ice at the top of the umbrella on the far side of the ice. If you're looking at it from a normal broadcast point of view. Doesn't really cover a whole lot of other things, but he does score a little bit, so he's close. I mean, that's mid-20s goal pace. But things are looking up in Buffalo. He's got a little bit more to work with. He is pretty one-dimensional, so I'm not going to talk too much about him. But power play goal coverage, that might be a guy you look for deep. Now, if you have face-off wins in your league category coverage, if you're in a points league with strict face-off weighting, some leagues I've been seeing have 1 point for a face-off win, which if that's the case, you definitely want to target JG Pageau and Jordan Staal. So for Pageau, 748 face-off wins last year ranked him 11th in the league, and then he added 2.2 hits per game on top of that. Then for Jordan Staal, he was right behind Pageau with 736 face-off wins, added 2.7 hits per game, which is, both of these guys are targetable for hits if you're looking for that later. And then if you remember back in 2021, I actually owned Jordan Staal. You don't remember that, but what you would remember, 0.71 point per game average, 0.3 goal per game average, 0.26 power play points per game, and 2.5 hits. So he was definitely productive in 2021. He just didn't find it last year. He did play most of the games. He was, it was definitely a down year for him at 0.46 points per game. The shot volume isn't there, but the hits volume is pretty good. In fact, if you're targeting a guy like Pageau at 2.2, if you're looking at Trocheck, he's around 2.2 hits per game, and you're probably banking on the line assignment with Trocheck. But if you want just hits or just face-off wins, Jordan Staal is still relevant there. And then the last guy I just quickly wanted to mention is Igor Sharangovich. So the 0.31 goal per game, he's climbing up there. He's getting to that point. I just skipped ahead without meaning to, but we'll get back to this and just quickly mention he's at that prime age. He's in his mid-20s. The Devils are getting more competitive. He's probably going to be targeted for goals and shot production maybe. 2.2 is not necessarily targetable, but ownable. And I would expect that plus minus to rise, but he's a 0.6 point per game guy right now, and they're adding some more pieces. They got Palat. They're adding Holtz, arguably to their top 6. He could be on a line with Sharangovich. You never know what's going to happen outside of preseason, so definitely keep an eye on that. But he's a guy who has been fantasy relevant for periods in the last couple of years, so he could be a deep value play if you need a left winger. Now, To summarize what we went over today, lots of older players that don't have that fresh name value. They are available. And what you're going to try to find is guys that are elite in one or two categories, the shots, the hits, maybe face-off wins. We covered a little bit of that. But you're not going to get a guy who's covering 4 or 5 categories and very good, and he just kind of slid through the draft. The other thing you could do, and some people have been doing this, is stashing Pacioretty. Nobody's covered this. I haven't really covered it, and I actually advised somebody to do that the other night, and he was going to do that, and somebody already picked him up and stashed him. So what that does for you is it gives you another roster spot. You can pick somebody up off waivers after the draft, and it potentially gives you a 30-goal guy when he comes back, probably around February. So you could potentially do that, but if you're not going to get that, if you're not going to stash an elite guy who's dropping in drafts, you're going to find somebody who's elite in 1 or 2 categories and hope to kind of round out what you need from this list of guys we just covered. And then you just want to monitor the line assignments. So especially for a guy like Kessel, if he loses that garden seat. So with Kessel, if he's not playing with Eichel, he's probably not playing second line because that's the Riley Smith Karlsson line. So he would more than likely bump down to the third line and become less fantasy relevant, if not relevant at all. So definitely monitor the line assignments. But that could potentially, if guys get bumped up in the lineup, that could potentially help them as well. And this is something that I'm going to be monitoring through the course of the season this year with some of the updates videos that will be going on during the course of the season, trying to see what line assignments have been given out, what guys are being favored on power play units and things like that. But if you stuck around to the end, I want to thank you for watching again. I always mention this. If you want the data visualizations that you saw in this video, you can find them in the description below in the Patreon link. They're available for just $3 a month. For $5, you get that. Plus, you get access to our awesome Discord server with an awesome amount of people, talking about a lot of different topics. Usually, some teams that we don't normally think about or cover. There's some guys in there who are covering the West Coast, which I don't get to see all that often. So definitely a great resource to have, not just for the draft, but for the rest of the season as well, because you can kind of stay on top of things a little bit better when you have more eyeballs looking at the game. So I just want to thank you again for paying attention all the way through to the end. I want to thank everybody who helped me get to 1,000 subs. We went over that in the live stream the other night, and I will see you in the next one.